The Fables of Elphega, The Twins and the Antique Chest, written by D.J. Turner. Chapter 1. The Antique Chest. His parents named him Tobias Thomas Trotter, but everyone just called him Toby. The boy and his twin sister were both redheads. Toby had a shock of carrot red hair, a generous splash of freckles across the bridge of his nose, and clear azure blue eyes. Tara had silky auburn hair, and her bright green eyes were as captivating as a cat's. The 10-year-old twins lived with their parents in house number 33 Twix Lane, Tweeds Down. Every weekday their parents left for work. As a chef, Brown Trotter worked long hours, while Gail Trotter was a typist who worked in office hours. Their mother usually returned in the late afternoon, while their father only got home long after the children were settled in bed. On weekends, Mr. Trotter often caught up with sleep, while Mrs. Trotter would spend hours doing tedious household chores. When the twins returned from school during the week, the house was usually empty. Their only companion was the family cat Spangles. Their ginger Tabby loved basking in lingering patches of sunlight, where he would find such a luxury as the weather was usually overcast. Tara loved to cuddle the cat and keep him in her room for hours, where she would often play her violin, imagining that one day she would become a famous violinist. Toby was usually left frustrated, bored and alone, and he couldn't stand his sisters playing. Her music sounded like a screeching cat, and sometimes Spangle joined in, and it sounded like a cat fight taking place. While Tara seemed content, Toby yearned for more, for adventure and excitement of perhaps going to Africa. So Toby would take long walks, his hands shoved deep in his trouser pockets. It usually rained in Tweeds Down, and one Saturday afternoon he was walking along the sidewalk, splashing in muddy puddles with his Wellington boots. As usual, he was dreaming of excitement, adventure in faraway places, of doing something wonderful and extraordinary, of going somewhere different, where risk was around every corner. So he headed towards his grandmother's house. She lived 4 blocks away in a simple red brick apartment. Gran would have to tell a story. She always does, the boy thought as he quickened his pace. Raindrops trickling down his neck. The wind picked up as the leaves swirled around his ankles and the rain pelting down. Toby wrapped his raincoat around his shivering body as he walked quickly with his purpose and a spring in his step. On arrival at the apartment, he banged on the door with fervour. "Gran, it's me. It's Toby. Please hurry and open up, it's pouring." He hammered on the door even harder, frustrated that he was stammering. Sometimes that happened far too often. But at his Gran's house, he was safe, far away from the mocking voices of his school peers. Soon he heard her slippers shuffling along the narrow passageway. "Patience, boy, I'll be right there," his grandmother called from inside. Toby hummed under his breath while he waited, tapping impatiently with one foot. The key moved in the lock and the door opened wide. Although Angela Trotter was 75, she was still a beautiful woman. She wore her silvery white hair in a soft bun at the nape of her neck. The slim, graceful woman with gentle features wore rimless spectacles, her turquoise eyes sparkling like jewels. She was dressed in a blue floral dress and fluffy cream jumper. "Toby!" she exclaimed, and she took her grandson by the hand and gently pulled him inside. "You're soaking wet, boy." She bent and kissed him on the cheek, and he could smell her lavender soap. "Best we get you dry before you catch a cold," she scolded. Quickly she padded to the bathroom and returned with a small towel and began to towel dry his hair. "It's all right, Gran," Toby mumbled from under a towel. I walk in the rain every day. I won't catch a cold," he assured, peeping from through the folds of the towel. When she finished, Toby pulled off his Wellington boots and removed his raincoat. They settled on a comfortable brown sofa, and his Gran brought 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate through from the kitchen. "Now, why did you walk here in the pouring rain?" she asked with raised eyebrows. Toby shrugged as he took a long sip of his hot drink. His grandmother had made it just the way he liked, with warm milk, heaps of hot chocolate powder, melted chocolate and marshmallows. He smiled at her with a rim of chocolate around his mouth, his bright eyes twinkling. "I was bored and thought I would visit you, Gran. You always have such great stories to tell." His eyebrows arched, and suddenly there was a flicker of excitement in his eyes. "Would you tell me a story right now? Please tell me about that faraway, magical place you always talk about. That place called..." His grandmother smiled, light dancing in her eyes. "Alphega," she whispered as she leaned closer to him. "Yes, Alphega," Toby confirmed, his voice full of expectancy. The dear lady stood up and smoothed her rumpled dress. She seemed to hesitate as she turned to her grandson. "Yes, I'll tell you about Alphega, Toby. But first there's something important that I need to show you. And perhaps now's the right time." Toby's eyes lit up. "But what is it, Gran?" She walked across her faded brown carpet towards the dusty chest in the corner of the lounge. Toby raised his eyebrows in anticipation. "That old chest?" he exclaimed. Toby felt a little disappointed, but not wanting to appear rude, he did not voice the questions racing through his mind. Why is Gran delaying telling me another Alphega story? Why does she want to scratch in that old dusty old chest right now? As far as I remember, it's full of old junk anyway, he thought. Toby's thoughts were interrupted by the creaking sound of the chest opening. "You haven't been in the chest for a long time, Gran?" he asked with raised eyebrows. "No, I haven't. Not in a long time," his grandmother replied with a faraway look in her eyes, as if she was remembering something from long ago. A tingle of excitement ripped down Toby's spine. He shook himself to get rid of the uneasy feeling. The boy walked across to the chest and stood next to his grandmother, who was kneeling. Inside was an assortment of old clothes made from all kinds of fabric, like lace, velvet, and silk. On top were a few random items. Toby noticed a small brass trumpet, an old toy ship with tattered sails and a crooked staff. He selected the ship and held it to the light. "Be careful of that ship, Toby," his grandmother cautioned. But it's just an old-fashioned toy, Gran." Toby rolled his eyes. "A really old toy," he emphasized. Still kneeling, Toby's grandmother glanced up at him, her eyes shining. "Oh, but it's far more than just that, dear boy," she responded, her voice suddenly growing serious. Toby's brow creased. "Gran, what do you mean?" His grandmother nodded slowly. "Just remember, Toby, all is not what it seems. Perhaps one day you'll understand." She took her grandson's hand. "Take a look, boy." She removed the toy ship from his hands and peered closely at the sails. "If you look hard enough, you might see a mighty battleship," she explained. Toby stared and blinked, but all he could see was a tatty old toy. After returning the ship to the chest, Toby's grandmother picked up the crooked staff, a glint in her eyes. "This is a mighty weapon of escape." Toby looked hard. All he saw was an old stick. After replacing the staff, she looked at the dull brass trumpet, which was long and straight with a wide funnel. Tony picked it up, wiped away the dust clinging to the small musical instrument. "And this?" He blew into it, but there was no sound. His grandmother removed the trumpet from his hands and held it to her heart. "This wonderful instrument calls the pure of heart to battle, and even changes hearts." She lowered her voice. "Only used to ward off evil when it's absolutely necessary." Toby grinned. "You sound so dramatic, Gran. What's all this talk about battles?" "Another one of your stories." Carefully, Toby's grandmother returned the trumpet to the chest, lowering the lid and closing it with a soft thud. "I wanted you to see these things, Toby.
Why? He inquired, quite perplexed. Gran, I can see those things mean a lot to you, but to me, they just seem way too old. Toby's grandmother returned to the couch. The ship and staff and the trumpet all have glorious stories to tell. One day you might understand. The gentle lady smiled, kind of shining from her eyes. She patted the sofa, indicating to Toby that he should come and sit next to her. Back on the sofa, Toby felt anxious for the story to start. His grandmother flung the mohair blanket over her knees while Toby crossed his legs. He rubbed his hands together, waiting in anticipation. Tell me another story, another Alfega story, Gran, please. Angela Trotter closed her eyes. Now, Toby, remember what I explained before? Alfega is a faraway planet, very far from Earth, beyond the known universe. In Alfega, there are talking animals, as well as elves, fairies, and other folk. The massive planet known as Alfega is mysteriously linked to Earth. I remember the first time I saw Earth from Alfega. She hesitated, as if she was remembering something from way back in her youth. I remember that our planet looked like a blue-green jewel in the starry night sky, and a shimmering gold band surrounded the entire Earth. And she whispered, from a distance, our battered, broken world looked perfect. Toby leaned forward. A shimmering golden band? He echoed, curious to know more, his heart pounding with excitement. His grandmother smiled, eyebrows raised. Yes, boy, a magnificent golden band. And there's more, an amazing twine made of bronze, silver, and gold joins Earth and Alfega. Toby burst out laughing. You have such an imagination, Gran. The lady looked deeply into her grandson's eyes, and her shining eyes seemed to turn a deeper shade of turquoise. You think that I have a vivid imagination, dear boy. What I'm telling you is the truth. In Alfega, there is a garden more beautiful than ever seen on Earth. And in that faraway place, the air smells of flowers, honeysuckle, and dew, and a magical fruit grows there, too delicious to describe. A magical fruit, too delicious. And an eternal unicorn canters and contours of the rainbows, races with the wind, and flies faster than shooting stars. Toby sighed. His head sank into the warmth of his grandmother's sofa, yearning to hear more as he tried to imagine the garden and the eternal unicorn. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt like he could breathe the air of that sweet-scented faraway place. Please tell me more, Gran, Tony murmured as his eyes grew wide. His grandmother looked up, her eyes full of wisdom. There are many worlds, Toby. Earth is only one planet in a single galaxy, and there are millions of galaxies. Toby sighed, the wonder of it dawning upon him slowly. I can hardly grasp it. It's so big out there, so much we don't know, I guess, so many other places. His grandmother nodded. Now you're beginning to understand. Toby took another sip of hot chocolate. But how is Earth linked to Alfega, he asked. His grandmother tilted her head to one side, thoughtfully, and she said, well, that took me a long time to understand. Then I learned that every world has a parallel world, and that Alfega is ours. Toby scrunched his nose. But what does that mean, a parallel world? It means that the two are connected. What happens here affects Alfega.